Good evening, everyone. It is 6:38 p.m. It's Wednesday, May 31st, and I'm calling this meeting to order. The meeting is being broadcast via Natick Pegasus and recorded by Pegasus for future viewing. Thanks to them for broadcasting and recording it. At this time, I'm going to review a topic for the board to consider going into executive session, and that is pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A6, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property if the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. -5 Auburn Street Development Agreement. Do I have any motions? And I so declare. I thought I said that.
So moved.
Moved by Rich, seconded by Catherine. And Mr. Joseph?
Yes.
Ms. Pope?
Yes.
Ms. Coughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Sidney?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So we are now in exec session. We should be back hopefully around 7:15 or so, possibly a little more towards 7:30, but hopefully not. Thank you. It's 7:37 p.m. We just exited executive session and are returning to open session. Before we begin, will those of you in the meeting room please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence for those serving on our behalf. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, let's start first with announcements. Announcement of the 2023 Susan G. Salamoff Summer Internship recipient. And, I'm gonna, is that over to you, Jamie?
Absolutely. Sorry, thank you. Yes, so we are excited to announce this is the first summer where we are honoring a former colleague through an internship program. This was an initiative of the select board heading into this upcoming fiscal year to create and formalize an internship program. I believe we actually had the discussion on it last year at this time, and it took us a little while to get through. We were hoping for it for last year actually, but it took us a little while to get through the sort of establishment of what the internship is and recruitment for that. And we do have our intern here as well as the namesake for the internship, Sue Salamoff, who's on the Zoom screen. I'd like to welcome up Jacob. To the podium, or yep. Jacob is joining us from, he's a soon-to-be senior at Colgate College, correct, senior?
That's correct, yeah.
So you're just a junior. And we had a great list of respondents and very talented young people from Natick. Jake is a Natick resident, born and bred. And still lives in Natick and is joining us this summer from Colgate College, soon to be entering his senior year. I don't want to put him on the spot, but he's certainly welcome to say a couple words if you want to, Jacob.
Yeah, I've heard so much about Mrs. Salamoff's work over the years, and it's a real honor to be the first recipient of the internship that bears her name. So thank you to everyone here. And it's been great so far. I'm learning a lot, and hopefully I can continue to do good work for the town. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob.
I'd like to give Ms. Salamoff the opportunity to speak now on her, since she's the namesake of this internship. And I'd also like to thank a former colleague, Mr. Michael Hickey, for shepherding this through the process and making it all happen. I'm sure, I know in fact, that it took a lot of work and a lot of perseverance and a lot of love too. So I appreciate all that. So over to you, Sue.
Hello to everyone. It is an exciting
day for Natick to have, especially an intern in the Select Board Town Administrator's Office. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for Jacob, as well as it's wonderful for the town to have somebody that will be able to work on many special projects and learn about Natick's town government, but also the specialness of being able to work in local government where you really can make a difference. And it's a terrific board and terrific leadership in town. And I wish Jacob the best and a continuation of the program.
Thank you very much, Sue. Appreciate all you've done over the years. And you continue to do, even from afar. The next item on our...
If I may
Go
just
ahead,
briefly,
please.
Mr. Chair, so Jacob Brown will be helping us on a number of things this summer. We have projects lined up in the Human Resources Department, with our communications director, looking at policies on behalf of the board, and really a myriad of projects that we're excited to have the additional support and just sort of young, eager eyes to help us advance some of these really important initiatives for the community. And we're also encouraging and trying to bring Jacob to various meetings that we have, just so we can get a flavor as to what our days are like. So even just last week, Jacob joined me and Jillian Wilson Martin on a trip into Malden, where we were attending an event that Congresswoman Clark put on about the stimulus funding that's coming out, or it's not stimulus funding, it's the more recent
Inflation
Reduction Act from the federal government that we attended in Malden. And it was just great to have Jacob there to hopefully have him learn a little bit and also just ask questions and just be a part of the team. So we're excited to have Jacob on board.
Welcome, Jake. Okay, next item on our agenda is public speak, which is any individual may raise an issue that's not included on the agenda, and it will be taken under advisement by the board. There's no opportunity for debate during this portion of the meeting, and this section of the agenda is limited to 15 minutes, and any individual addressing the board in this section is limited to 5 minutes. And is there anyone in the room or online who wishes to speak? I don't see anybody in the room, and I don't see an online. Do you, John, anywhere? It's on that screen. Okay.
Other than Sue. Sue's sticking around for the meeting.
Sticking around. She
No,
misses it. All right. Select board updates. Do we have any from anyone? Paul? Sorry, Mr. Joseph.
That's right. I go by both. Thank you. Just very briefly, I had the honor of attending the Metro West Chamber of Commerce had an Executive Connect luncheon yesterday with Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, and what was great about the event, it was relatively small, more intimate in the sense that we had a chance to really connect with her afterwards, and got to talking a little bit about the previous work that the previous administration had done on their economic development plan. The Healy-Driscoll ticket is now, they're working on the economic development plan for the Commonwealth. And just in talking to her about some of my experiences at the Chamber of Commerce and some of the work and things that we're focused on here, she seemed very receptive, and I was very, very impressed with how accessible she was to new ideas, to the end that, we're going to follow up. But in terms of transit initiatives and things that are truly needle-moving investments that the Commonwealth needs to make over the next 10, 20 years, I was pretty critical of some of the things that haven't been done that we've talked about for many years, and had the opportunity to follow up with her assistant. So what I wanted to just kind of put out there to folks as we think about the things we're trying to do, between the Natick Labs, which I also attended last week, the Natick Soldier Systems Center Natick Day, really opening up their doors and kind of showcasing what they're doing. We've got some great opportunities with the new administration coming in to think broadly about the things we want to do, and I think the administration's doing a phenomenal job. I'm not telling them anything they don't know, but I think as the the elected piece of this to, a part of our role is putting political pressure on things and really kind of focusing and turning up the heat when we need things done. But I just wanted to kind of use that opportunity because I really hadn't had the chance to interact with folks at that level for a while. And I was very happy to see how receptive she was to new ideas, new thinking, and they really are soliciting input from their municipalities. So I just kind of wanted to tuck that away as an opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for representing the board so well. Anybody else have something? I have a couple much more mundane things. One is the Natick Center Cultural District. Every Thursday night during the summer, you have Natick Nights. And the first one is tomorrow night. So it is, neighbors can find food, shopping, music, family-friendly fun in the Natick Center, our Natick Cultural District. It's 5 to 7:30 p.m. The Adams Street Art Alley will feature beer, wine, food, and music on June 1st, 15th, 29th, and July 13th and 27th. So have fun. The weather is going to be nice tomorrow, I know that. A little warm. The second is, as part of our ongoing community outreach, one of our members, I think it's Rich this weekend, is going to be at the farmer's market from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., so please stop by and chat. And anyone else is always welcome. Okay, now let's move. Any other comments?
Sorry. That's one of them. Just two quick things, if I could, to the board. May 31st is the end of Mental Health Awareness Month, and we did have a very active month with events both for town staff as well as the community. We even did a full session yesterday with department heads around mental health awareness and our employee assistance programs, just to make sure that we're all informed about what services are out there. And then we had a number of other, some more well-attended than other trainings and events throughout the month. So I just want to make kudos of that to town staff who helped put it on, especially members of our health department, our fire department, HR department, and other town departments that were active, police as well as others that were active in both the organizing ahead of time and also just the implementation during the month. So it was very well. I thought it was a great first year of mental health awareness and just something to build on. And we are hoping to ensure that we can continue to move that initiative forward throughout the year, so it's not just 1 month, but we're going to continue some of these dialogues throughout the year with our staff and with the community. Secondly, today started the first day of our Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Outreach. I did not ask him to attend tonight because I want him to stay with us longer than one day.
We'll scare him away. A wise decision.
So he will be at a future meeting, likely the next meeting, but potentially the second meeting in June. We'll see which time he can make. He does have family commitments like we all do, and I didn't want to presume that he can attend right away in this first month, these night meetings that we all know and love. But he's jumping in with 2 feet. He's in the town administrator's office, so I encourage the board, members of the public to come in and say hi. Very accessible. These first few weeks, months are going to be when he probably has the most accessibility because he's going to be just learning and listening and talking, and before he really gets to dive into the projects that we're going to be working with him on. So I encourage everybody to come in and say hi. His name is Troy Smith. And he most recently came to us from North Shore Community College, where he was an adjunct professor for a number of years. Tenured professor.
Yeah.
Definitely not adjunct, tenured professor.
The other part that I'd like to mention about him is he did a lot of practical consulting work in this area, and so he's in the city of Lynn. So yeah, he's got a lot of experience and will definitely hit the ground running. Okay, thank you for that, Jamie.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to discussion and decision. First item is the retirement board presentation and request for a vote for approval for 2% COLA increase for retirees and survivors. I understand that Kathleen Riley and Michael Reardon are here. Do you have a presentation, or?
Did you get the the Siegel report on with the impact?
Can you go to the mic, please?
Yeah. We have not.
Sounds like no. Oh,
Yeah.
that's no. And there's also a memo in there from PARAC, which is the governing
Yep.
regulatory body for the state retirement.
Thank you, Mike.
If you could, just for the record and for people watching from home, can you just reiterate what you just said?
Sure.
With the microphone. Yeah.
Hi, Mike Reardon, Retirement Board since 2009, and Kathy is our actuary, Kathy Riley from Siegel. So because of the inflation rate over the last year or so, PARAC, who is the state regulatory board for the retirement systems, has allowed for greater than the normal 3% rate. And just to be clear, it's 3% on the first 13,000 of a pension. So it's about $400 a year normally, increased cost of living, which, as you can imagine, it's pretty meager. But, and there are measures to increase that base, but the highest it can go is 18 or so, 18,000. Natick's on the lower end of that, by the way. So in order to go from 3 to 5%, the Natick Retirement Board had to vote for the extra 2%, which we did in the affirmative. And then as an additional step, to include the town's approval, we have to also get the town's governing board to act on it before June 30th of this year. So if it's something you could act on tonight, great. If not, sometime before then, in order for it to be. Now, the Siegel document that I gave you, and Kathy's going to walk you through a couple of the numbers if you'd like, just to discuss the impact of doing it versus not doing it. It goes through an existing, the existing funding schedule, which, by the way, has 7 more years left of a 40-year payment schedule. So we're getting close. It was a 40-year mortgage in 1988, and we're getting close. So it's almost done. But anyways, do you want to take it from there?
Sure. I'll take this. It's easier to read. So as Mike said, the proposal is to increase the COLA from 3% to 5%. It's a one-time increase. It would be effective retroactive to July 1, 2022, so the beginning of the fiscal year. It's an extra 2% on the COLA base, which is currently $13,000, so it's an extra $260 a year for the retirees eligible to receive a COLA on July 1 of 2022. And that's a closed group. They'll receive that extra $260 for their lifetime and their beneficiaries if they've elected an optional form of payment. So the first thing we did was measure the amount of money that you need or the additional liability to fund that extra 2% increase in the COLA. And in the middle of the page, that's identified as $917,000. So it increases the unfunded liability from a little under $73 million to a little under $74 million. But as a percentage of the total liability, it's less than 0.5% of the total liability. It's a pretty in the big picture, insignificant additional liability, although it could be very meaningful to your retirees. So once we identify the cost or the impact on the unfunded liability, the $917,000, the next step is to figure out how to pay for it and how to incorporate it into the existing funding schedule. So the Retirement Board has adopted a funding schedule that fully funds the retirement system by fiscal 2030. And the appropriations or the annual contribution increases 4% per year each year in that funding schedule. On the top of page 2, in the left-hand column there, you can see the appropriations for the current funding schedule from fiscal 24 through fiscal 30. And fiscal 30 is what we refer to as a partial appropriation because it's actually a slight decrease from the prior year's appropriation. So there are 2 ways to fund that extra $900,000 of unfunded liability. It can either be sort of deferred and included in the last payment, and that's what you see in the second column. The last payment row, the 2030 payment, has gone from $10.9 million to $12.4 million. But if you look at every number above it, there's been no change in the payments for fiscal 24 through fiscal 2029. And the alternative is to spread that cost out like a mortgage payment over the whole schedule. We assumed that you didn't want to change fiscal '24, which starts in a month, and that the first payment would be made on fiscal '25. So if you look in that right-hand column, you can see fiscal '25's a little under $200,000 increase, and that $200,000 increase carries through to the whole schedule. So it's either pay it all at one lump sum at the end of the schedule, or spread it out over the cost of the schedule. That's it in a nutshell.
And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that table. So I've never presented to anyone on this body, but I usually come in every couple of years and go through it. But that changes every two years when we redo the valuation. So, and it's been moving in a good direction lately. If we have a bad year in the markets, it goes up a little. If it goes, by and large, just as a backdrop, I think at the end of 2021, we had the third best performance in the state over a 10-year period out of 106 retirement boards. So we've had a pretty prudent investment program that could soften the numbers that Kathy just talked about over time in general. And I won't rule out a 2008 to happen, but I like to think we're trying to protect against major events like that. So just a little background on that table. So that will be set in stone, but only for 2 years.
Okay. Yep. Questions from the board? Rich?
Yeah, just, I just want to remember, the state requirement is to hit this by 2040, and we're 10 years ahead of that, right?
No, actually, the state requirement was 2028, and they allowed for up to 2040 if you wish to drag it out after the 2008, right? When they allowed towns to amortize it over a longer period of time. We pushed it out 2 years. We chose to do so because we thought it was prudent to leave a buffer in case there's another bad year.
Well, that's exactly the point I was getting to.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so there's room, if something really bad happens, to soften the blow in other ways.
Exactly. I think we did some analysis back when we made the decision, and it was going to cost another $75 million to drag it out to 2040 in interest.
Yeah,
And we thought that would not be prudent.
okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Ms. Coughlin?
Is there a best practices with either of these two options, to defer the payment to fiscal 2030 or increase 2025 through 2030? Is there a industry-wide actuarial best practice that would be recommended?
I think better practice is to spread it out over the whole schedule. It has less of an impact when you get to it. You leave a little bit more capacity at the end of the schedule, and you're not backloading it. You're kind of paying for it over the majority of the period over which the participants are benefiting from the plan change.
Thank you.
And if you have a downturn in 2030, you're not in a difficult situation.
Or retirees live longer.
That's it. Sydney?
Yeah, actually, this is a question for administration. There's a budget impact either way. In terms of budget impact, do you have a preference which way we go?
I mean, I think the predictability is key. So obviously, these numbers aren't locked
Of course.
until then, but just understanding once we get an updated actuarial study in a couple of years, what those new numbers will be is always a benefit for us when we can say, this number is locked, it's set, and we can predict for that. I would go with the recommendation in the sense that it helps us over time absorb the cost of this, and there's not a balloon payment or some type of end-of-life payment that we would be realizing at that time, especially given when you get further out, it becomes even more unknown.
Yeah.
So it looks great on paper now. In 2 years, we'll know if it continues to look great on paper or if we need to adjust accordingly based on our budgeting practices. But that's just the reality. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we're in the process of doing an updated valuation as of the beginning of this year.
Oh, it's this upcoming year. Okay.
That will be done later in the year.
The 2 years is now, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was sooner, but I didn't
So
want
the 2 years ending in 2022?
Yes.
Calendar? Okay.
Yeah, I think we just incorporated the last year. We have one more year into our just updated FY budget. Well, it doesn't matter. But the point is that from a practice standpoint, absorbing over time typically is a more preferred option than kicking it or pushing it down to a later year when it's less predictable what's going to happen.
Just procedurally, do we need one or two motions here? One for the COLA and one for the payment schedule, or is it one motion?
I'd ask I don't know what you need from a compliance perspective.
We just need you to approve it. I think we actually have to decide what schedule, but your preference would weigh heavily on that. So
Thank you.
be happy to hear which one you want. Especially
Can I ask
the
a
one
quick
Kathy recommends.
Mr. Erickson.
I just have a quick question as well, if that's okay. So this additional 2% is sort of a unique situation, or doesn't happen often. It's not like an annualized event. Is there an anticipation that this might happen again between now and the end of 2030, between now and 2030? Or is this that unique that it's really not going to happen? Or you might not be able to predict that?
I can't predict, but this is the first time.
Right, that's
So
yeah,
it's-
the first time it's ever happened, correct? So who knows? It might happen in 5 years, it might never happen again.
You tell me where interest rates are going to be next year.
I'll be glad to answer that.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I just want to sort of
That's
ask
a
that for
great
the
question
record.
to put out there.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other?
I just had a request, if you could send these documents to
Thank you.
Mr. Erickson's office so that they can be uploaded on Novus for the public.
I think they were sent to Joan,
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Joan unfortunately
She was
was
at the
out
office
of the office today, so
but happy to
that's,
resend whatever.
No, that's
but
okay.
if she's got them, we can get them for her. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Additionally, if there's some point you want us, myself or another rep from the board to come in and give a longer, more detailed educational kind of walkthrough, just not in the summer.
Okay, probably we'd
August?
want to wait until the report, the two-year report is done, and then we can sort of do it all
That's a great idea.
together.
Yeah.
Very good idea.
Sounds good.
Ready
Okay.
for motion?
Yeah.
Kathy, did you have a preference?
If I can just clarify, the motion is really just for the additional 2% and then a
Yes.
recommendation on an approach, which is then handled by the retirement board.
Right. So move to approve the extra 2%, the 5% COLA for this year, and recommend the spread payment schedule.
Okay, and we want to do that as one?
Yeah, one motion is fine.
Yep. Second. Do I have a second? Mr. Joseph? All in favor, please say aye. I must be getting hungry. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is a 500. Thank you for that update. That was very quick and very to the point and really helped a great deal. So thank you.
Were you going to pull this item off the consent agenda? This
Yep.
is here.
Yep, I wanted to get them out too.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask.
Okay.
I should have turned this.
Okay, we're going to change the batting order a little. You can tell I've been coaching baseball too long. We are going to take something off the consent agenda because the gentleman in question is here in attendance in the room, and I'm sure would prefer to be somewhere else, doing something else, but maybe not. And that is Mr. Ravenel, reappoint Dennis Ravenel to the Cochituate Rail Trail Advisory Committee. So, Mr. Ravenel, if you want to come to the podium and describe why you want to be reappointed.
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. This is very interesting, and as I mentioned to Rich earlier, it's been a resident of Natick for close to 40 years, and enjoying very much seeing how the town is governed by this great body. I've been on the Rail Trail Committee for the last couple of years. It is such an incredible resource to the town. The committee is very dedicated, works very closely with FONT, Friends of Natick Trails. And we want to keep it that kind of a terrific resource, and we want to promote its use by all the members of the community as much as possible. And it's going to become an even greater resource as all of these other trails in the state and in the country become interconnected. So delighted to be here and enjoying working with that group, and hope to work with it for another couple of years.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Rapino. Given that it's on the consent agenda, we've already approved it, so the tension is that.
Not quite.
Well,
Approve it yet.
kind of, that's true. That's true. We got to go back to, now, can we approve that out of sequence now?
You can approve it now, and then you just
The
don't.
motion. Yeah, we pulled it out, yeah, that's what I
So you
think.
approve it now, and then you don't
Right.
say it as you do the consent agenda.
Okay, fair enough.
Mr. Chairman, may I make the motion?
Please.
Mr. Ravenel, I was delighted to learn that you're one of my neighbors. I live just down the street from you. Used to also work at Harvard, and
These guys are all
my colleague works at Harvard.
Harvard.
So we have a lot in common. I'd like to thank you for your service and for coming in person.
Here, here.
Yeah, that's always nice to meet in person people who are serving the town. So I move to reappoint Dennis Ravenel to the Coquitlam Rail Trail Advisory Committee.
Second. Who are you giving it to?
We'll
Pope?
give it to Ms. Pope. All in favor? Please
Aye.
say
Aye.
Hi.
All right, we got 500. Now we voted.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. For the
So-
record, I visited Harvard.
I have been known to visit.
I've been to the yard.
Actually, my first
I
house
have been
is,
to concerts at Harvard.
my first house is around the corner from Catherine's.
That's right.
Oh.
They're all in the hood. It is.
Yeah.
All right, going back now to discussion and decision. We have the town brand scope and roadmap. And
So I can just kick that off real quick. Before going into that, I forgot one announcement, if I can just make that before we get too far off of that portion of the agenda. And it's regarding the design public hearing for the 9 and 27 interchange project. This is a Mass DOT project that will completely rebuild the 927 bridge and interchange. It's a pretty robust investment. I think the current estimates are well north of $40 million, which were the last estimates. They're, I think, in the $70 million range, if not more. And so this is a big project for the community and for the region. Mass DOT is holding the public hearing later in June on Thursday. Just want to make sure I get the correct date.
It's the
Thursday,
15th.
June 15th at 7 p.m. It's a virtual meeting, so there's no in-person component. But for more information, we are going to be posting the flyer around town. I think we'll get it up on the town's website, or you can certainly, it's already up on the town's website. Or you can certainly go to Mass DOT's website or Google search 927 Interchange Natick, and it should come up with the project page. And then there'll be a link on the Mass DOT page to the virtual meeting when the date gets closer. And there's a lot of information on the Mass DOT website on the project, the design plans, the various other reports that were created as part of the project. This has been a long time coming, and it's great to see it advance. So I just encourage anybody in the community who has interest to help spread the word and also attend the virtual meeting if at all possible.
yeah, thank you very much for remembering that. I had it in my email and I didn't write it down for announcements, so I appreciate you catching that one.
Absolutely. So the next item, and I have Jay Poropatich, who is our communications director here, to walk us through a brief presentation on town branding, and this is really an update for the board. There's no decision for the board to make tonight. We just want to make sure that you're informed. And this stems from the work that we've been doing internally, led by Jay as part of town administration, to do some town branding work, because there really hasn't, from the town administration side, been quite the same town brand that like the school department has or other communities have. So it's an initiative of mine, it's an initiative of Jay's. I know it's been an initiative of the board for a number of years. We're providing this update now because town meeting action with the town seal also just happened, and we're past town meeting, and we're incorporating that action into some of what we do here so that we can have a really cohesive approach to this. Again, no action tonight. This is really just an update to start that dialogue with the select board and so that you know where we are as a town administration to move this forward. So I'm going to pass it to Jay, unless there's objection, to talk us through the presentation, which is available on Novus for those watching from home.
And you're going to project, John, as well? Yeah.
It's on right now.
Got you. Jay Portpaddock, Town Communications Director, also a resident, Precinct 8. I'm going to walk you guys through 11 slides. 3 of those are largely blank. Only 1 is dense, I think about 10 minutes or so. But like Jamie said, not an action, but certainly jump in with any questions or discussions you might have to clarify anything. So just from my idea of what we're going to discuss, the idea is,
Hold on a second, Jay. Hey, Matt, can you get this up? Thank you.
The idea, just looking on the very first slide, is a shared vocabulary. We're going to go through a couple definitions briefly so everyone's aware of those, and then give a preliminary roadmap. The scope of town brand, just to kind of define that really up front, is going to be a logo suite, which I'll walk through and define that even more clearly with illustrative examples, but think of it as cohesive logos that work together and create a consistent brand and have clear use cases. And then brand guidelines, how to use those logos, colors, fonts, and other sort of factors. I will say that this will put Natick probably in the top 10% of communities, even nationwide. If you look around our adjacent communities, not many communities take anything beyond the seal and think about a logo suite, what's on a DPW truck, what's here. So I'm going to show you guys some examples that are going to stretch all the way from Kansas to Michigan. And I encourage us to just think, bigger and broader, and I'll show some local examples as well. The next slide, just an illustrative definition of town brand. This is a metaphor of an iceberg, and I'm just going to walk you kind of left to right. The town brand is ultimately made up of 2 things, design and identity. Everything below the surface is going to be your identity. There are other work streams the select board's well aware of with like mission, vision, and values to help define those as a town. What we're actually talking about is that red dot towards the tip of the iceberg. That'll be colors, fonts, but ultimately that logo suite that I referenced. So again, the iceberg is what you see above the water, but ultimately everything that matters is often below. And those 2 things, come together, and that gives you a sense of a brand. You have personal brand, you have employer brand, you're familiar with consumer brands. Town brands are something that a lot of communities look at, often referred to as place branding, but this is kind of the definition. The next slide is to show you the idea of what a logo suite is using pictures. I think it's important to know that there are typically, most organizations will define 7 logo types, and I'll briefly walk through those. Some will say 6. Some of the internal, really, that the Natick dialogue has been, is it a seal or is it a logo? In fact, a seal is one of the 7 logo types and is nested within emblem. So that's the one, if you look to the right side, that's the Harvard example. Harvard's already been mentioned tonight. And you have your, various emblems or coat of arms or a town seal would all be an emblem. But then you have everything else. And if I showed you the Pepsi as an abstract and I flipped the colors, you'd probably know it was still Pepsi. If I showed you Nassau with a different color, you'd probably know. So I think all these examples will start to work, and I'll show you a couple illustrative examples of towns and communities. But I think we're going to look at the particular use cases and figure out what is necessary for Natick to communicate our town brand. We do not have marketing budgets of these brands, so why do we do this? And that's kind of the next slide. Just in a bubble format, just to kind of think about why we want to create this town brand. There's the idea of just doing civic pride, and ultimately, it's how distinctive is that logo for us to identify as Natick. Trust and confidence in us as a town staff. That could be things just like a set of branded documents that could be shared with the public, and you instill trust and confidence in our services. Utilities, just marking town assets, again, DPW truck, buildings, other factors. Employer brand and economic development, those are smaller in nature. A lot of communities, bigger cities, will think about economic development all the way at the forefront. But I still think there's some benefit to us, the town of Natick, but I wouldn't put those bubbles as big as some of the others. Tourism on the bottom right, That is, in many cases, the Bostons, the Chicagos, they're leading with that. That's not something I think is a consideration for Natick, as great of a destination as we are. I'll pause briefly. Any questions or moments? Okay.
So far.
Hit the dense slide yet. I'm going to pause and just briefly kind of walk through the town seal and a transition plan. So if you scroll through to the next slide on the transition. The way to read this, there's an illustrative y-axis, and I'm just using prominence as a definition of the higher up on the y-axis, it's a more prominent placement of the seal. What's the two red representations on this is one on the top, and this is when I think that we can introduce a logo suite, which is October of this year. One of the very next slides will walk you into that roadmap. Prior to that, in September of this year, and that's on the bottom, represented as the embosser, that is the newly approved bridge and the town seal that was approved in the April Springtown meeting. The embosser work should be complete with our fiscal budget starting in July, and a conservative estimate is that we will have a newly approved embosser available to us in Town Hall to go on any sort of legal documents that are embossed, marriage certificates, birth certificates, other factors. In addition to that, what we're currently doing right now is thinking about physical assets. Where is the town seal right now? And doing a complete audit of that. We did a preliminary one as part of the Town Seal Review Committee, but our facilities team is doing a much more comprehensive. So think of it as the town hall as having a picture frame. There's floor mats at the DPW building, other sort of areas like that. Not suggesting we're going to necessarily put logo identities on floor mats going forward, but we're just looking where that inventory is. Whereas in the digital documents, which we're also doing right now, in many cases, that can be a simple remove. If you think of something like a press release or internal letterhead, if it has the seal as it stands right now with the John Elliott version, we're just removing that when possible. And then we're figuring out what that logo suite will be going forward. And in October and beyond, we'll start to introduce that as we see kind of appropriate. So this is at the highest level. I would say the more complex ones around apparel, vehicles with decals and other areas, we're waiting till we define that logo suite, again in October and beyond. And end of life, that's the EOL, we'll think about how do we phase those out and potentially avoid any sort of budget asks as we go through town meeting cycles. If in fact we don't need it, and we can just age out assets. In some cases, we might choose to be more aggressive and eliminate the imagery that town meeting voted to change. Any questions? Okay.
I am.
Back to the town brand, and if you go one more slide, just on a process orientation, I think this is kind of key just to understand where we, town administration, where we're focused. I think there's 4 key items for us as we do this successfully. One of which is just straight upfront definitions. I gave you and flashed up 7 logo types. In fact, there's words behind those 7 logo types. We want to educate the select board, the general public, and others, just so they understand why we, town administration, are working towards it, and we have shared vocabulary. A creative brief. A creative brief is the lifeblood of any design work. And that is something that needs rigor and attention. I've actually been doing design work with our Natick High School students for the last 4 months, and I'm leading with briefs that are pretty detailed. I spent my 20-year career in private side marketing, and those briefs are literally telling a designer the exact criteria, the emotions you're looking to evoke. I mean, that's key for a successful project. Rigorous surveys, so we're actually cutting the data to make sure it's representative, making sure that we have all the best practices so the survey data we're coming back with is in fact entirely valid and confident. Engaging the public, I'll walk through a roadmap, is doing as much of this as we can up front. If you look to the right of this slide, design work is subjective. It is also, design principles are a very highly skilled set of individuals to understand all the complexities that goes behind that. I mean, the Pepsi logo was not designed hastily. There are professionals thinking about what, in fact, they're trying to evoke. So we want to make sure we're doing that, engaging as many parties as we can through the process, reaching some degree of a critical mass and support from the general public. We realize that, again, design work, subjectivity, we're not going to be an approval rating of greater than, X%. It's going to be a modest population because there's going to be so many opinions. We'll walk through how we engage the public throughout. But ultimately deliver something that evokes pride. The next slide is the most dense, but let me walk you through how to read it. I think flashing this up and giving you guys some confidence. So the way to read this one, the y-axis, strategic items that are labeled in blue, and then foundational items in red. The blue items, just to walk through those, are when are we going to do a design brief, and then have design V1, V2, and then final designs. Ultimately, we think this can be about a 5-month project, starting next month, well, tomorrow, in June, and then going through October. So we feel like we can hit that mark pretty easily. Beyond that, figuring out the other blue item is actually what's being labeled as a design review experts. I mean, I came from the private side with marketing. I think we, Natick, and other neighboring communities, namely Framingham, have a lot of very successful brands that specialize in marketing. How can we engage those CMOs, those VP, SVP individuals? I happen to know many that are our residents who in fact hold those titles. And I'm confident we can bring them together, do a live summit, record it, and make it available for the public so everyone's feeling like they're getting educated. I purposely tried to put it after we had V1 designs so we could get those experts to talk about it. Down below, anything in yellow is going to be where we engage the public. Most of that you'll see is survey work that's done prior to each step and then post. In addition, I feel as though we can have 2 core working teams. One internally with staff, so we can engage our staff. Externally with local residents who have a marketing background. I want to get their credentials and understand, what have you done in, marketing and branding, and get a small core working team that's meeting consistently over a cadence of time. Again, hopefully to not only allow the general public to inform, but also let some marketing experts come in and serve that. I won't read through each of the items in red, but those are foundationals, largely to RFP. And in the very bottom is actually doing a series of case studies and looking at neighboring towns and allowing them to present to us, Natick, so we can be informed on what they've done. 2 slides left. These are distinctive logo suites, and this is what our output might resemble. I'll be relatively brief and not go through each one of these. But Baldwin County, just outside of Lawrence, Kansas, 4,000 residents, they have a suite of logos that you can see here when they take things like Wordmark, where they have Baldwin City, but then they actually look at a suite of landmarks and they start to create an illustrated view and pictorials and other sort of, ways of showing these landmarks and bringing their community to life. In the case of Portland, Maine, their work is pretty impressive. I've been able to connect with the woman that runs Portland Communications. She came from Boston. I've been able to connect with Amherst, Salem, and Westboro peers of mine. So I'm pulling out examples that I think not necessarily are the best design in the world, and I can go into detail. I do think there's a lot of great work behind Portland's and what each thing stands for. In the case of Gilbert, Arizona, 270,000 population just outside of Phoenix. If you go through and have time and you enjoy brand, I would check their work out. It is a masterclass in brand. It's probably the most impressive piece I've seen. And this is just a left to right illustration, which they've done over decades. And then lastly, the one on the right, this is Royal Oak, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. At the end of the day, the work itself, I think is somewhat interesting, but just to show you how it comes to life with things like department lockups, so you can see ultimately the RO and the watermark on the letterhead and other sort of facets. I think that's where we, the town, could brand it and really stand out. Last piece. Where we need the select board, not tonight, this isn't necessarily a decision, but as we go through the process with yourselves, I think there'll be some prominent seal decisions, something like the town hall that's very prominent. I think there's creative brief feedback and design feedback. Those are moments where we want to figure out the right way to engage with yourselves and make certain that we have the select board input in each one of those cases. That is it.
Questions? Ms. Pope?
I thought this was really well done, Jay. Thank you very much. It's good to hear where we are headed. I had a question about the tourism piece. I just wanted to better understand your thought process around that. And then very random, but separately, I'm a big fan of Royal Oak, Michigan, so
Oh, there
Nice
you go.
call out, yeah.
A lot of hard Googling work to find communities that actually had brand guidelines and a consistent logo, so that one popped. In the case of tourism, I just simply wanted to call it out as being motivations that many communities, in fact, pursue this work. They tend to be bigger cities with, larger economic development and larger budgets, quite frankly. In our case, I don't really foresee us developing this for the purposes of, sheer tourism. There's a little bit of economic development where I do think we can attract and become a better target for businesses. But the idea of people getting in planes and flying to Logan and driving to Natick, I don't think is our motivator.
Understood, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? I just have a comment. I had a similar reaction as a recovering marketing person. I wasn't a branding person, but this to me just is tremendous work and detailed planning, doing a lot of what-if scenarios, and very illustrative of the possibilities. So I thank you for all and it's clear that there's a great deal of thought and hard work that went into it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any comments from the public? Anybody online? I don't see anyone. Okay,
see
thank you very much, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
Next, we'll move on to Main Street design work, which I believe is you, Jeremy.
Yes, there's nothing in the packet. I just wanted I'll provide a brief update on this. I'm just going to pull it up. While we do that, I want to thank Jay again for the hard work in this. It's been something that I know has been a long time coming for the community. Ever since I've been here for the last 8 years, we've been talking about the idea of having consistent letterhead, logos, branding, and having that sort of branding suite. I've worked in organizations before that have had that. Natick has loosely had that through the years, but I'm really excited to have this work completed so that we can really amp up our game when it comes to this work. And I think we're at a good point in our history to do that now. So thank you. So just briefly, Main Street, I wanted to bring this to your attention and the public's attention because Main Street is such a main thoroughfare in town. That's why it's called Main Street. And it's been a bit of a long time coming as to how we got to where we are today with regards to some of this work. And this is really just conceptual work that we have funding for. But you may recall or may not recall, a number of years ago, I want to say 10 or so years ago, town meeting appropriated funding, a couple different funding actually. One was a borrowing authorization and one was just sheer funding from free cash. The funding from free cash was $50,000. The borrowing I think was in the $200 and some odd thousand range for design work to really look at Main Street. For various reasons, that design work didn't get initiated. I think part of it was maybe capacity at the time. A lot of that appropriation happened prior to even my time with the town. I know when I started here, we were already so focused on North Main Street and South Main Street, that Main Street itself, which is really just from North Avenue or just over the bridge from the railroad tracks, over the railroad tracks at the MBTA station, to roughly Cottage Street. Is the area that we're talking about here. I think Main Street might technically just be the portion to 135, and South Main comes all the way up there, but the portion that we're talking about with regards to this process goes to Cottage Street, because that's approximately where the South Main Street project ends. So that section hasn't, I mean, there's been a lot of thought about it. We know a lot about it because of the ownership issues that are in that area and the other things that we need to be mindful of, and it's a very main street in town. But we haven't had an opportunity to really advance the work. Fast forward to the last year or so, we've been able to secure some grant funding through the state, through ARPA funding from a pandemic relief program to advance, actually I think this was not pandemic relief, it was other funding from an economic development bill, to advance this work, this conceptual work. So we are at a point whereby we're going to be doing, it's a multi-phase project. We have McFarland Johnson hired as the town consultant. I believe this board actually signed the contract a few meetings ago, maybe 2 months ago or a month ago, to focus on the area that we're talking about. It's going to include just conceptual design work because the community engagement component of this is going to be key at this point. We're balancing robust community engagement with the need to get a design concept, because we need to be able to get something that we can use to advance forward through design work and understand from a cost perspective what this is going to cost us. We had an internal kickoff meeting just with town departments earlier in May, as well as representatives from Natick Center Associates. And the purpose of there was just to get some goals of the project and some basic concerns that we're all aware of, from Natick Center Associates to town staff, through the work that we've done through the years, out on the table to the consultants, so they can start just doing their analysis, existing conditions, do some initial concepts, what we can and cannot do in this area from a design perspective. We're intending to do a second meeting with the same group in the coming weeks ahead, and then that will lead to something that we can then bring forward for robust community engagement. We did quite a bit of community engagement on Main Street during the Natick 2030 process, so we have some foundational work there that we can pull from. That did involve a lot of community feedback. We also, through the years, have done other smaller community engagement processes. For example, we did a road safety audit that included community engagement as part of the MBTA station design work. Even the station design work itself did a lot of community engagement with key stakeholders and businesses and property owners in the area of Natick Center. And we've also completed some of our own sort of studies. A couple years ago, pre-pandemic, through the work of the Safety Committee and our Public Works Department, we did a barrel and other study to see how pedestrian mobility could be improved if we just shorten the distance between crosswalks, for example, and how that might look at the MBTA commuter rail station. Some of that work is actually supported and fed into the MBTA station work. Some of that work will be part of this work. So we're really trying to give an opportunity for all of this work that we've done through the years to let the consultants understand that before we just go into community engagement, because we've already done quite a bit, and I want to start with that foundation from the consultant team. And then the idea is that over the summer, we'll have more working groups just internally, but then that will lead to a much more robust, more public-facing community engagement process this fall. We don't want to have those big public meetings this summer. It's a tough time to get people involved. So the intent is to really line that up for the fall timeframe. We also do intend at some point in the coming months to hold a separate public meeting with the select board, or at least an update meeting. We can have it be a more robust formal public meeting, or just an update meeting with the select board. So I just want you to be aware of that. Maybe think about if you wanted it to be a more engaged public meeting, or just an update meeting at a regular select board meeting. We can really kind of do either or, and then come up with concepts. We don't have enough funding to do full design. It's a pretty big project, and there's a lot of competing interests here. Pedestrians, cyclists, people going to the train station, people coming here for the farmers market, people turning all through. There's so many competing interests here that there's a lot of need for analysis on this front. There's also a lot of unique property ownership challenges. For example, the parking spaces in front of the Clark block are actually only half on town-owned right-of-way. The other portion of it is actually through an easement that we have with that property owner that was secured a number of years ago. And similar, and that's common in urban areas. I wouldn't say this is atypical, but it's something that we just need to be mindful of as we look at this thoroughfare. So this is really just an update, answer any initial questions you may have, some suggestions and other things that we can bring back to the team, and then just to let you know and the public know that this summer we're going to be doing some work, and we're hoping that in the fall we'll be doing more community engagement work at that time.
Thank you, that was very comprehensive.
Mr. Joseph.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you, and I appreciate very much taking the past work and incorporating that to inform the future work. I think a lot of times we fall into, like many organizations, we put stuff, do the effort, and it becomes shelfware or it becomes outdated very quickly. But with the consultants' profession, I think they'll be able to extract from it what they need. The other thing that I think is really important for the public to understand, and I'm sure will come to light during this process. You know, a lot of times we get compared to other communities. Why can't we do this downtown? Why can't we do that downtown? And I think you just hit the nail on the head in terms of unique property ownership, unique challenges in terms of design. There are very specific reasons for not progressing in certain areas for economic development reasons that I've learned over the years have to do with property ownership and exactly rights of way and things like that. So I'm glad we're going through this process. I really applaud that you're going to do it publicly, and I think it'll be as educational as it will be directional for the community. So thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? I'll just say ditto because that was eloquently said, so.
Comprehensive.
Yes. Maybe.
You know, if nobody else stabs you, you might as well stab yourself.
Yeah, that's all right. All right, thank you, Mr. Erickson, for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
The next piece is the ARPA spending plan update.
Thank you. And in your packets are a couple past presentations, but the big one is, and I'll pull it up on the screen in a minute, is it's a single-page PDF document that I'll just speak to, and it's really just we're at a point whereby we submitted. It was actually at the end of, well, it was through the end of March, so we submitted it in April to the federal government, our update. We do quarterly updates with ARPA funding. Just for those watching over the last, I believe, year and a half, 2 years now, the select board has been consistently reviewing a spending plan for ARPA funding. The town initially received an estimated $10.6 million in ARPA funding for pandemic relief, American Rescue Plan Act funding. We have been actively moving through the use of those funds per the select board's approved plan. Since it's a grant program, it's really under the purview of the select board. And there's various categories and very specific qualifying expenses that we can use ARPA funds for. Some of which we have been tapping into, some of which we really don't have projects that we can utilize for that same purpose. Some of these things include, for example, economic recovery or response. In the case of the town, we have been able to categorize the negative impacts on our, for example, local receipts, and that's part of our town revenue recovery. But it's also for some other projects or for some initiatives that we have that are tied to infrastructure or tied to initiatives of the select board. Some things that were initially part of the plan actually got other funding sources. So for example, on the update that you see in Novus, it talks about communication website upgrades, contact tracing funding, PPE for schools or public safety or town. In the case of the top two, communications and contingency contact tracing, those were largely covered with other grant funds. In the case of PPE for schools and towns, those were largely covered by FEMA reimbursements or Federal Emergency Management Act reimbursements. So the fact that we had those other funds means that we didn't have to use ARPA. We still are doing that work or have done that work. In the case of contingency contact tracing, we actually don't do that work anymore, but we had grant funding from other sources, state and local. So the big changes or just update for the board right now is a couple things. One, the expenditures that we've completed through to the end of March 2023, which total just north of $4 million. So we are actively working on spending the funds. A good chunk of those funds are for things like the town revenue recovery that represents largely what we spent this current fiscal year that's soon to end. If you recall, Fall Town Meeting incorporated funding into the current fiscal year budget. We've appropriated funds as part of the next fiscal year budget that get up closer to that $6.6 million amount that the select board has authorized for spending, but we haven't spent those funds yet. So that's why it's not in that expenditure side. As well as approximately $1.46 million for PFAS upgrades. This is directly in response to PFAS, which water systems and wastewater systems is a very specific allowed use for ARPA funds, as well as broadband, but we have not that, that broadband is more of a rural community challenge that needs to be addressed. In our case, it's really the PFAS issue that we've been spending the funds for. We still have some funding left in that 1.7 million appropriation that we've talked to the board about expending, or will be talking to the board about expending for continued PFAS funding project work. We have also allocated, the select board has also allocated funding for facility upgrades for the HVAC systems. That funding is specific to the Morse Institute Library project. We authorized that with the intent that Morse is one of our warming or cooling shelters, depending on the time of year. So therefore, it is one of our critical pieces of infrastructure in buildings. And they had a very old system that needed to be upgraded. That helped to leverage about $1 million of additional funding from other sources. And then we are using it for our Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Outreach, which will have a focus on engaging in outreach with populations disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and how that will tie back in over the next couple of years with the engagement of that work. A couple things to note also is that we initially had some funding for communications and the PFAS that we had to allocate from ARPA, but then the federal government has been improving the portal within which we can actually submit our reports, and so we've been able to reallocate those to other sources. And then also, there's been several rounds of the rules that come out from the federal government with regards to the use of funds. So you may recall early on, we were grappling with what can we use these funds for, what can't we? Initially, we couldn't even use it for some of the local recovery, revenue recovery, then we found that we could. So we're still, we're hoping we received all the guidance on this front, but you'll see, for example, the upgrades to the HVAC system, we initially put in as an infrastructure category, and we've had to since switch it to address negative economic impact. We can still use it for that purpose, but we've just had to change the use category because of updated guidance and updated rules from the federal government. And this is really just an update to the board. Again, no action unless you want to take action. I'm currently not proposing any changes to the use of funding. One additional thing to note is that we initially had a budget from the federal government of an anticipated $10.6 million, $10.65 million. When they finally did the full calculations, we actually received $10.775. So we've put that additional funding currently in the town revenue recovery, but this can be a topic of conversation on how the board may want to allocate those funds.
Perfect. Question? Go ahead.
Thank you for the update, Jamie. I see the allowable use category, and so I don't know if this would fall into it, but Jay had mentioned that we don't have a marketing budget. Would that be something that could ever come out of ARPA funding?
Not likely ARPA. Mm-hmm. And we did get a grant from the state to handle, we actually, the $200,000, we initially put $200,000 for communication and website upgrades mm-hmm. through ARPA mm-hmm. when we thought this was when the initial draft rules came out. We subsequently actually applied for and got a grant from the state to do the same work.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so that's what we're currently going to be likely using for some, maybe not all. We still have to get more into the branding exercise, but we are using it for some of our website upgrades and some of our other marketing upgrades okay. Right now. So we are working through that $200,000 that we got from the state.
Okay. Thank you.
Joseph.
Thank you, and thanks for the update. Do you anticipate any shifts, when you look at the list as it's allocated right now, based on your experience over the last year or so, projecting out over the next year? Because we have until 2026, is that right, to spend it?
So we have until the end of calendar year 2024 to appropriate
it, right.
And 2026 to spend. So just big picture, my intent is this time next year to basically be back to you if we need to do any shifts and say, here's where we're shifting, we're prepping for the end of the calendar year, and we want to make sure we use all of it. Yeah. We have a couple things in our favor. Town revenue recovery, our initial estimate of the 6.6 or 6.5 million, we're updating that annually. So with even this upcoming fiscal year, we've made some adjustments further, and we can absorb up to, we believe, 8+ million, which might be where we shift some funds into, depending on some of the use of funds in some of the other areas. PFAS is also another area that we're looking at for potential continued use of funds. That is a very much a qualifying use water systems. And we have some potential expenses coming down the pipeline that are going to be potentially large. So I would think those are the two areas that, as we get closer to that 2024 deadline, we're going to be shifting funds into those two areas to make sure we capture all of this funding. Where I see funding coming away, well, the funding for the facilities upgrades, that's largely already been spent. It's just not showing on here yet because we're waiting for the final bills. The public safety advocate clinician, that work is advancing as we speak. Again, I don't think the funding has been spent yet because they're still bringing and onboarding additional clinicians. Like everybody, they've been hit with some personnel recruitment challenges. And then the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Outreach, that's the one that we're going to be starting to spend from now that we have that new hire on board. And it's possible that by the end of 2024, we might not have spent all of that funding, and then we might shift whatever's remaining to another source at that point. The school educational response is another avenue that we're actively have been working. If you recall, that was actually higher in the beginning of this process at $2.5 million. We reduced it because schools, in working with the school department, they received more funding from other resources as well. So we were able to reduce that amount, put it towards PFAS and the town revenue recovery. As we continue moving forward, we're going to be working with them on qualifying expenses because they can't just bring it into their budget. It has to be for qualifying expenses. And if it doesn't work for qualifying expenses, then we would look to shift that as well into, for example, town revenue recovery, which then gives us actually more flexibility, or into water, sewer, PFAS upgrades.
Great.
And
Thank you.
it's really at the discretion of the board, all of this. So even though it's currently allocated for any of these uses, the board could choose to say, you know what, no, we're going to put it towards this use. Again, a qualifying use.
If I may, just to follow that up, thank you. Again, the details. Earlier we heard a presentation on branding, and we saw an iceberg logo, and the substance that was under the water line was the mission values and all of that. And you talked about civic pride when you were talking about branding. I think about, I'd almost think of that logo, that image, instead of an iceberg, as a sailboat. And I think we have a very deep and a very strong rudder and foundation in this team. Again, every time we talk about this stuff and you demonstrate the amount of thinking, adjustment, tracking, anticipation that goes into spending this money. When I first sat in this seat and now that I've been reelected to this seat, a lot of times people talk about money and thinking that we find money and there's some kind of voodoo that goes on when it comes to money. But every time you speak, and especially with regard to the ARPA funding, I think you have demonstrated why we have so much confidence in what you are doing with this administration and with this team, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd just like to follow up on that point. You gave a great illustration of what Mr. Joseph was just talking about in working with the schools to find out what their actual need was and make adjustments on the fly. So that, as Mr. Joseph described, it's one pie. And, we only get so much that we can have coming in. And this administration does a fantastic job in seeking out, and it's not just seeking out grants, it's securing grants, right? It's easy to find them on a website somewhere and think, oh, we should apply for that. But securing those grants, being aware of things, and following up on that. So, again, ditto rule.
Thank you.
Out of curiosity, do you have any concerns that the discussion on Capitol Hill about clawback ARPA money is a concern?
Yes, I'm not going to lie. Yes, we do have concerns. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring this to you tonight is show that we've already spent $4 million. We do have all of these funds in our accounts, so it's not as if it's something that we're waiting for. And our understanding is that funds that have already been sent won't be.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
But one never knows. My hope is that we can show that we're actively spending this funding, and we're already 40+% of the way through, if not more, given if once we pay off some of the bills, for example, for the HVAC system and some of the other expenses, that we're well on our way to spending these funds. And we have a very robust and active plan that has community buy-in and community engagement and votes from this board that we're pushing forward.
When we say appropriate, so my understanding, the discussions on Capitol Hill is that at this point, and of course it's changing right now as we speak, but funds that have been spent would not be clawed back. Funds that had been appropriated would not be clawed back. We're looking at 1.6 million in the school budget, or school education response. If that, what does it actually mean when we appropriate? When we tell you how to spend it? We, the board, I mean.
So I don't, this is where I think a federal definition, I'd like to understand what their federal definition is, because in theory, I could argue and would argue that the board, which is the grant recipient, has approved this spending plan, and therefore that's the appropriation.
That's what I was looking for.
That's how I would go for it.
Yeah, me too.
We go above and beyond locally to have the town recovery funding to be appropriated, even though it's not required by town meeting, because we're pulling it into the budgeting process. That's not required. Again, this board could just tell us, spend it for this purpose. We're just choosing to go above and beyond locally. But my argument to the federal government, should they ask us, is no, we've already, look, and we've had consistent dialogue with the board on their appropriation of these funds as outlined in these regular updates.
And we've taken votes on this
Correct.
spending plan, right?
Yeah, you've already voted on this spending plan. It hasn't changed since the last time, except perhaps the additional $125,000 or so. But that's, it's still something that that I would argue that we've already appropriated for purposes of being the grant recipient and receiving the funds and reporting those funds.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, so much depends on how they define it at the federal level.
Of course.
Thank you. Great question. That was the elephant in the room that I was hoping one of us would ask. So, well handled.
I also think we've gone, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think we've also gone above and beyond. So we've spent $4 million. We've also gone above and beyond and appropriated an additional $3 million in just this fiscal year, upcoming fiscal year budget. So all in all, we've spent
70%.
upwards of $7 million of the $10 million.
Right.
But I think I'm hopeful, and I do feel strongly that we're in a good position, but so much will tell these coming days ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions, thoughts? Okay, that's great. Mr. Erickson, you're still up. Rhode Island Avenue disposition process.
Thank you. And thank you to the team who are heading out. This is, again, just an update. There are some materials, past materials, on this Rhode Island Avenue disposition process discussion. And I just wanted to bring this up because in future meetings, now that we've built some capacity in-house, and we've also advanced some other things that were authorized to the select board by town meeting. I want to give an opportunity for new board members to get up to speed on this before I brought forward a request for you to actually issue an RFP. Rhode Island Avenue is a small piece of land that's up off of Route 9 that is kind of like a remaining parcel that is fee simple owned by the town. Even though it's called Rhode Island Avenue, it's not a right of way anymore. It's actually a town owned parcel that was sort of remaining post the Oak and Route 9 interchange project from about 9-10 years ago. It actually originally was acquired back in the 50s through the Mass DOT taking process of the Route 9 expansion project. And Rhode Island Avenue was a town road that went up to what was then Route 9. It's a small parcel. I can certainly pull up a map just to show the public watching from home. what it is, but it's in essence a small parcel that is abutting to the north, Route 9, really actually DOT property, because it no longer goes all the way to Route 9 the way they reconfigured the intersection. It used to be that sort of weird turnaround part of Route 9, now it's just DOT land. To the south, it just sort of ends into roughly Oak Street. To the east and west, it's owned by, there are two parcels that are actually both owned by the Scrub-A-Dub car wash property. Also to the south is the town's fire station in this area of town. I believe it's the East Fire Station. So it's this piece of land that currently is really pedestrian access to Route 9, as well as, I think, just some grass. We were approached by the Scrub-A-Dub property owner to see if we'd be willing to sell it. The town, through state rules and regulations, is not able to just sort of directly sell to a property owner. So there's been a lot of dialogue, and those are the materials that are in the Novus agenda tonight with Scrub-A-Dub. But again, what we had to do at the time was actually seek authorization from town meeting. That happened a year ago, town meeting, to seek that authorization for the select board to dispose of this property through a 30B compliant bid process. That authorization did occur, and you may recall over the summer and the spring, this board was working through a couple other projects, including 5 Auburn Street, as well as the South Natick Dam review and discussion, that I felt it prudent just to put a pause on this one. This is a little bit simpler. The idea here is a couple things. One, put together an RFP. We have a draft RFP that we're already working on with our procurement team, our office director, and put it out for an RFP for the highest bidder. There are some caveats that the board will be asked to consider that I would recommend. One would be, it doesn't have to be the entire parcel, it can just be a portion of the parcel. I believe there's indication in some of the materials that you have from Scrub-A-Dub that they would only need a portion of the parcel, or would like to own a portion of the parcel. Two would be perpetual pedestrian access over this area, so some type of easement for pedestrian access to Route 9. There is a bus stop that is relatively active at that section of Route 9, and we want to make sure there's safe pedestrian access to that bus stop. 3 would be any underground utilities. I believe there are a couple underground utilities at this location, water, sewer, maybe some private utilities as well. And then ensure that any future use of this would be, in the case of this area, could be, you can put some other caveats, like for the betterment of traffic flow to and from the property. In the case of what Scrub-A-Dub has indicated their use for it, it's really to improve the circulation to and from their facility. This isn't a problematic area, especially on nice days. You'll probably, if you drive up there tomorrow, for example, there might be some lines. Usually it's weekends in this time of year, and it can back out onto Route 9. We do have a lot of active police presence during those events, just to help move traffic along and ensure public safety. But in the minds of Scrub-A-Dub, this would help their on-site traffic flow should they be able to be the successful respondent to an RFP. Any project like that would likely have to go through some type of permitting review, depending on what it is. But the board is authorized to do this disposition, and I just want to bring it to your attention because it's atypical, but it is something that the board has authorization to do. So before I brought an actual RFP for you to issue and then seek responses, I just want to get this in front of new board members, especially to help answer any questions or just for your general awareness. With that, I can answer any questions. There's no action again tonight. It's just more for your information.
I do have a question. Thank you, Jamie. What would be the benefit to only doing a partial? You mentioned that you could do the whole thing, or you could do like a partial.
It really depends on who would be responding, what they would see the benefit as. In our case, The entirety of the parcel that's Rhode Island Avenue does extend down pretty close to our fire station, and we might want to retain that portion that's proximate to the fire station, just in case in the future we rebuild the fire station or redo circulation to and from the fire station, or other considerations that having site control is a benefit to us for that portion most southern that would get proximate to or even front the town's parcel at the fire station.
Thank you.
Ms. Coughlin?
I'm looking at their proposed layout of what they would do, their, an illustration of what they're conceptually thinking of. I know that this isn't etched into concrete, but the 5 employee spaces are really, it kind of looks like the area that we would most want to preserve down that end towards our fire station, as opposed to maybe the area at the top near Route 9, where they don't propose to use that property. Do you see what I mean?
So there's 5 employee parking spaces. Are you talking about the 5 that are more proximate to the commercial building?
Yes.
So I obviously can't speak for the intent from the applicant's perspective. And again, all of this, should they go forward with this or some type of plan like this, it would likely go in front of the planning board for site plan review. My presumption is that those employee spaces are potentially for the office building, maybe not for, or potentially for, I'd have to confirm with them on what is the intent of those employee parking spaces. Are they for that smaller building, the commercial building, or are they for the scrubbed up facility itself?
My guess it's for the scrubbed up facility, because they've eliminated the parking spaces in the front and moved most of their employees in that building. I was just there last weekend, coincidentally looking at this, remembering the presentation you gave to us last year and trying to figure out mentally where this piece of property was. And they've moved that to more spaces in front of the office building, the former Verizon building.
Yep, could be.
So,
Which they own as well.
right.
Yep. I'd have to defer to them on that. And again, these are some site plan issues. These are all very much conceptual. I think it was informative to help the board at the time understand what was happening as we went through the process that we need to go through in front of town meeting and others and other processes. But it is illustrative of the southern portion of the Rhode Island Avenue parcel, really from our perspective and their perspective being more beneficial to the town retaining it versus giving the entirety of the parcel to any future owner. And again, this would be open to anybody to respond. So we're talking about scrub it up because that's the presentation materials, but it can be anybody who can respond. Yep.
So how would the RFP be composed? Would it be for the entire parcel and or entertaining offers for a portion of the parcel? How does that, what does that language look, not literal language look like, but how do we cast that?
So my recommendation would be that we get as specific as we feel we need to be. So for example, I would recommend being specific about ensuring that there's an easement over this parcel for pedestrian mobility to and from Route 9, and spelling out to a certain degree, maybe not exactly the dimensions, but to a certain degree, the southern portion of the parcel retaining town ownership and giving it to whoever the respondent is to tell us where that exact delineation is and also how they would choose to handle that permanent access to Route 9.
Okay.
So keep it a little bit vague, but also be specific in the sense that we would want to retain some key components of the parcel, whether it's an easement right or actual fee simple.
And so this will go through a design review process. I don't mean it in the capital DR design review, but this will go before, say, planning?
So depending on the respondents and what responses we get and what they propose to do will determine that future permitting.
Okay.
And one thing the board could consider, although I'm not sure, I need to sort of think through this more, is whether or not the final sale is contingent on any permitting, should permitting be required. Meaning, kind of like how a development agreement might be in place with the developer on a building, hypothetically. It might be something whereby a final sale could be contingent on if a future owner needs permitting, go through that permitting first, commit to the project, and then we'll make the sale. That could be a consideration. Or it could just be sell it and let them deal with the permitting, because they're going to go through permitting most likely anyway, depending on what's happening with the
What they
parcel.
want to do. Thank you, Mr. Erickson.
Good question. Very good. Rich, yes, okay. Okay, any other questions? Moving right along. The next item is proposed meeting minutes review process, and I'll kick that over to Rich.
Thanks. Thank you. This will get into Novus eventually.
It's in.
It's in? It's in Novus now. So I had sent out an email suggesting a process for getting minutes reviewed. I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at them, look at the process. And I just wanted to get approval to actually implement this process, because, and answer any questions that you might have about my thoughts on this. And my goal, and I just want to say this to the public, my goal is that everybody gets a chance to look at the minutes, get the corrections in before they go into Novus, so that once they're in Novus, we can get them on the consent agenda and approved. There'd be obviously a couple of exceptions. If there's some substantive problems, they can't be taken offline like that, because that becomes a serial debate. So those would have to not appear on the consent agenda. But this would get all the trivial editing done, so we don't have to pull something off the consent agenda to announce, change this period, put in this whatever. So that's my goal. And any questions, I'm happy about the process. You've seen it. I'm happy to try and answer.
Point of clarification, Mr. Sidney. When you said this gives everyone an opportunity to review the minutes, what you mean is members of this board. This is
Yes.
not a public process.
Right, yes. Members of this board, to make sure that they are actually factually and typographically correct.
Yeah, I just want to make that clarification for the public. And then the second question is, the only thing I would add is that they're drafted in in Word document. We've kind of talked about that, but a Word document that's editable, so that we don't have to parenthetically set forth
Yeah, and
typographical
I'll
errors.
make sure that that happens. I'll work with John to make sure that happens.
Other than that, great work. Thank you.
Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know if we need a vote or if consensus is enough, but we've already started to try and do this a little bit. And I'll work out the fine details with Joan so that we can get as many minutes, take up less meeting time with minutes and get them done more quickly.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Erickson, do we need a vote, or can we just
I
make
don't
this
think there's a vote
policy?
needed.
No, I don't
No,
think
this
so.
isn't
Right.
a formalized policy or action.
Board agreement.
Good job. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thanks for laying that out.
It's more minutes and fewer minutes.
There you go.
Exactly.
I knew you were going to come up. I knew that was coming, too. It's like watching a slow motion train wreck. Okay, the next item was the Kennedy Middle School Civics Action project, which is a placeholder. We rescheduled that to the June 14th meeting. I just wanted to comment about how great the activity. I wish I had a civics class in 8th grade that was like this, where they were encouraged to contact the local government leaders and pick an issue, and they've picked some really good issues, honestly. And as chair, interacting with them has been a great deal of fun, interacting with the students themselves and interacting with their teacher. There are 3 classes at Kennedy of civics. And each time I get that, I get an email, or we all, as a board, get an email from them. And every time I see that email, I think they've researched the issue, they've presented the issue and the potential resolution really in a really well thought out argument. And I thought, 8th grade, this is fabulous. This is just terrific. So I'm looking forward to having them here next week. The teacher said they're a little nervous, but I convinced the teacher that it'll be all right. They'll be on Zoom.
That's good. A little nerves never hurt anybody.
That's good. It's like get the game face on. So. Okay, moving on to the last item, which is an LGBTQ plus A plus proclamation from the Select Board, and I'd like to ask the clerk to read that for us.
Proclamation, whereas the Natick Select Board believes in the inherent dignity and worth of all who live, work, and spend time in our community, and whereas the Natick Select Board values the substantial and considerable LGBTQIA+ contributions to our community, and whereas the Natick Select Board strongly upholds the rights of all who live, work, and spend time in Natick of every sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression to be safe, valued, empowered, and supported by our neighbors and community leaders, and whereas Pride Month honors the June 28, 1969 Stonewall Inn uprising in New York City, where members of the LGBTQIA+ community and their friends were assaulted, harassed, arrested, and worse, and whereas the resistance of the LGBTQIA+ community and their allies to the events of June 28, 1969 marked the beginning of a heightened consciousness of the injustice of discriminatory laws and practices against LGBTQIA+ Americans, and whereas the Natick Select Board embraces the rights of the LGBTQIA community to live their lives freely as their authentic selves. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the Natick Select Board on this 31st day of May 2023 declares the month of June 2023 as LGBTQIA+ Pride Month in Natick, Massachusetts, and urges all to recognize the contributions of the LGBTQIA+ people and to promote the principles of equity, liberty, and justice, and I so move.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Coughlin. Thank you, Mr. Sidney. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we have the copy of the proclamation that we can all sign later.
Yeah, we're going
We're going to have to do some editing.
Yeah, there's a couple of minor edits.
Couple small things. Sorry, who was asked? Catherine. 500. Okay.
Why was the IA added?
Because that's the current,
I consulted with 3 people on this.
It is, actually. It's a relatively new term. But- So, yeah. I have a document that explains it. Okay,
consent
so
agenda.
you want to take a deep breath? Okay.
Yes, we've already pulled item F out, so the consent agenda is item A, approve Rotary Club of Natick's request to hang a banner for the Tour de Natick from June 12th through June 18th, 2023. B, procurement officer award contracts. A, award chemical feed upgrades project W165, award Newfold Drive lighting upgrades project 2023. C, approve Tessa Kaminsky's block party request to be held on June 15th, 2023 from 4 to 8 p.m. D, approve American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's request to hang a banner from September 10th through the 24th of 2023 for National Suicide Prevention Week. E, approve Safety Committee recommendations submitted by Chief Hicks. G, accept Friends of the Natick Trail's request to accept a donation of a maintenance shed for the Cochituate Rail Trail. H, approve Natick Center Cultural District's request to host a food truck for the Juneteenth holiday on June 19th, 2023 from 1 to 4 p.m. in a parking lot on Park Street.
Okay.
And I so move.
Moved by
Mr. Chair, I would
Richardson.
like to remove, I'm sorry.
Sorry, there's also a hand raised.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to remove item E from the consent agenda.
Okay.
Is your microphone?
Need to do it.
Okay, so Ms. Coughlin's removing item E.
Me, right. Okay. Okay, so it is,
A, B, C,
A
D,
through D.
F, G, H, and E and
you
F
already
are
did
out.
F, right? Okay, so it's, yeah, okay. And do I have a seconder? with the amended EM. Mr. Joseph, thank you.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Ms., now, I'm not sure the order here.
Ms. Coughlin wanted to pull E, so
Right, so
Let's
do you...
defer to the chair.
Do you want to comment first? And I see that Mr. Ostroff has his hand up. So.
To give you some background on the safety committee recommendation,
sorry.
the DPW submitted a request to Complete Streets, which is a program for the Commonwealth, which funds construction projects that allow for pedestrian lanes, bike lanes, accessibility ramps, things of that nature to ensure that all people have access to roads. That grant application was submitted without coming before this board, the safety committee, the traffic safety committee, or really any other place. The application, as it was submitted, indicated that that particular road, which is West Road leading up to Campus Drive, was not used for vehicular traffic, which is not the case. It was not used for transit, which is not the case because school buses use it, and was only for bike and pedestrian traffic. It was funded, DPW undertook the construction and put in a bike lane. I spoke with Bill, Mr.
McDowell.
Thank you. The town engineer about the background and the process. I pulled, this question was raised at a safety committee meeting about there had been accidents, there had been fights, there were buses that were careening into the bike lane. Even after additional signage was put up and some enforcement mechanisms, it still ended up presenting itself as a safety issue. I attended the second safety committee meeting after doing the research and presented it to the committee, indicating why it was the way it was and how the town took its process. Recognized that there was a disconnect between the safety committee, the traffic safety committee, the DPW, and the administration. And so I've been having a number of ad hoc one-on-one meetings with people to figure out the best way to create a smooth and seamless policy or a process by which hands would touch projects without, they would get review without actually holding them up. And that's a delicate, it's obviously delicate. At this point, so I wanted to indicate why I wanted to pull that off, what the history of that was. I was at the last safety committee and they voted unanimously to recommend the select board to remove the bicycle lane and to remove those signs. And I would support that motion.
And just
Yes,
add
of course.
one thing, which is all of what Ms. Coughlin just said, and I did watch that safety committee meeting, and the suggestion is to remove the bike lane and create 2 lanes that are explicitly marked, but also to have share the road signs, which are indicative of, hey, you got bicyclists who are going up this road too. So the dedicated bike lane wasn't working for the reasons that Ms. Coughlin cited. And in listening to that, I'm convinced that, I want complete streets and I want bike lanes everywhere, right? Everywhere that's feasible. But 2 things stood out for me, that the share the road you see on a lot of busy streets. And quite honestly, I would love to have seen how many bicyclists actually go up that hill, because I'm a lazy bicyclist. I'll take away, or I'll go a mile out of my way so I don't have to do a big hill. So, I don't know how many students at the end of the day are going up that hill with traffic. So, in my view, this is the best solution.
Just a PS, it's also worth noting that from the time the project ended until the time the project started, the problem started, was a time period of about 6 months, because it ended shortly before winter. So there weren't cyclists on that road. It was something we were unaware of until the weather got nice. So it isn't a road used year-round by cyclists, or it appears not to be.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Sid?
Yeah, and I just want to, I actually attended that last safety committee meeting also. And I live in that area, and when I come up Campus Drive to make the sharp right turn onto Pond Street to go home, it's almost impossible not to go through the bike lane. And the bike lane sort of ends abruptly about 10 feet back from Pond Street with no obvious place to go because the sidewalk isn't there. So it's a tough place. There's a better design that could have been done if the thing had been reviewed by a lot of people, which apparently didn't happen.
Or even several people.
Yeah.
Any further thoughts, comments?
Does-
Mr. Ostroff you have your hand up. So. Can you please unmute him? Very good. Mr. Ostroff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. I have a few comments and concerns about this agenda item. And I would ask that rather than taking action tonight, just a few days before school ends, that this be referred to the administration and come back to a future meeting. I was on the Transportation Advisory Committee, not the Traffic Safety Committee, for about 6.5 years before I stepped off last November. And part of the reason I got off was because I felt that that committee and the safety committee were operating in silos. We, as a committee, had recommended a better integration, a coordination of projects, and that never happened. And there were a number of initiatives that we had recommended to the board that there was no follow-up whatsoever, including, planning for a better bike and pedestrian connectivity, or implementing speed limits, better communication with the public, just a number of things that didn't happen. And so it's very discouraging to see this come up when, there was actually a public process around this grant application. This was on the agenda of the Transportation Advisory Committee for a few years, actually. It was not funded at its initial request, but then it subsequently was funded. I shared with the board earlier today communication from the former DPW director that included many members of the administration and police, members of the safety committee, advising them about this grant. I can't speak to all the particulars of the grant. I'm skeptical of what I've heard, some of what I've heard tonight. I'd be very concerned with the proposed outcome without any kind of planning or engineering process. To take what was a single lane, then a single lane for vehicular traffic and a buffered bike lane, and then have two traffic lanes on a road that's really not designed for two lanes, and expect that Sharrows will provide a safe alternative for cyclists, when there hasn't even been any planning around how we want students to get to and from Natick High School safely. To me, this is not a good process. It's not a good public process, and it's really, I think, going in the wrong direction for where we want to go as a community. I don't doubt the concerns about safety. I know that when the drivers are asked to give up a lane for a cyclist, that there's not always good results. One of the things that was mentioned at the safety committee, because I did watch the video as well, was maybe there should be some vertical elements, flex posts, for example, to separate the lane. But I think that the board is doing a shortcut here if you approve this recommendation without giving staff an opportunity to discuss it, and without even notifying the Transportation Advisory Committee that one of their recommendations is going to be reversed. So I just have a number of concerns, and they really, I think, go to the lack of collaboration before decisions are made and even after. As I noted in my email, this board 6 months ago voted changes to speed limits that have not been implemented. The state was not notified about a change in a speed limit on a road to which they have jurisdiction. Others haven't been implemented on Pleasant Street, and there's been no movement on a number of other things. So I want to share, I try not to personalize issues, and I certainly don't like coming before the board as a former member and criticizing the decisions that you have made or might make. But I feel very strongly that a lot of people's thoughtful work is being discarded here, and the opportunity for better collaboration is being set aside when there's really not the urgency that people are perceive. I mean, I'm not saying that over the next week there won't be more road rage, or that a cyclist might not, be nudged aside, or, I mean, I can't predict what will happen, but I do feel like it's sending the wrong message to the volunteers that you appoint, and saying that it's okay to operate in silos with no collaboration and no communication. So I just want to let you know of my concern about this matter. And of course, the board will do what it wants, but there's no communication with the public about this, just a very cryptic recommendation from the safety committee, a meeting that was, in a time of day that most people aren't aware of, no notice to the committee through whom this recommendation was initially made. I just don't think that's the right way to serve the public. So I just want to let you know my strong concerns about this, and I would rather that you refer this to the administration and have them come back with a recommendation. It may be what you're saying should be done now, but at least you will have sent the message that you'd like people to work together, rather than perpetuating the disconnectedness that has been the hallmark of the way these two committees have functioned in the past few years. Appreciate your time, and I'm glad to engage.
Thank you, Mr. Ossoff. I see this as two separate issues, and then Ms. Coughlin has some commentary on that. I think Ms. Coughlin rightly identified the problem of the process that you described, and that there needs to be a better, more streamlined process. However, I have heard from a number of parents, I've heard from a number of people on the safety committee of real concerns about accidents, and I would really feel horrible if there were some accident that I could have prevented that resulted from not acting on this specific instance. Yes, should some of this work be done and completed and followed up on? And yes, and that's on us to follow up with town administration. But I do not think we should do it in this specific instance on a recommendation from the safety committee that involves students and buses and such. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Coughlin.
So I think we're talking about, I think we're talking about three different things. We're talking about, well, first of all, there's a reference to no process and no planning, but if we approve the safety committee's request, we're discarding a lot of people's thoughtful work. So I completely agree with you, Mr. Ostroff. We've had this conversation before about the siloing, and that definitely needs to be addressed. This board has been consumed with a number of issues, meeting sometimes twice a week over the last several months. So it's not something that's been full in front of this board. It hasn't been at the top of the paper. I think that making this decision tonight is not discarding the work of all the many volunteers who give time to the town. As road commissioners and as individuals who approve and uphold the ethos of the Complete Streets program, we also have the ability to make decisions that are based solely on safety. And this is a real safety issue. I've gone down there several times. This is the third safety meeting that's addressed it. You mentioned that You mentioned that there were some aspects of the conversation that you may have been dubious of, so I will send you the original application that went to the state, which I pulled out and looked at. I also sent it to the former, who's the individual who's no longer with the town, who signed off on it, and made 4 phone calls, and those calls were never responded. So I did a lot of legwork on this. It wasn't the case that I just listened to a lot of gossip from DPW. I'll send you that so you can have a look at it, and I move that we adopt tonight the Safety Committee's recommendation.
Could I just ask one other question?
Yes. Yes, go
What-
ahead.
I'm sorry, thank you. I don't doubt people's good faith efforts here. Certainly not Ms. Coughlin, who I know how hard you work on this and other things. And I can't attest to the completeness of or accuracy of that application. I don't have that in front of me.
I'm sending it.
I am concerned about the precedent it sets for Natick to take a state grant and like unwind it, and what that will mean for our future applications. We have brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding for important projects, and I don't want the town to be disadvantaged. So I think that before taking any action, it would behoove the board to reach out to the Complete Streets Coordinator at Mass DOT and just explain to them what's being proposed. So and then the second point is, that's not a 2-lane road. And I would be concerned if you take this recommendation or construe it to make it into a 2-lane road. I don't mean 2-direction. I just mean, 2 lanes side by side. I just don't think that there's justification for that. And if it's not a 2-lane road, then there's there's room for 1 traffic lane and 1 bike lane. So it just seems like an all or nothing approach that to me is hasty and ill-considered. And I'd feel better about this vote if there had been any movement on the past recommendations of the committee to have better engagement, collaboration, planning. So I realize that these are separate issues, as the chair accurately stated, but they're connected. And I really hope that there will be much more engagement. So I know there's no motion to refer this to the administration, but I think taking this action without any consultation with the grantor is not prudent. And I really want to underscore that, having worked with state agencies and brought in a lot of funding to Natick over the years, I would never remove a grant-funded project without consultation with the granting authority. I just think that's really setting a bad precedent. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Oster.
I did send an email to Complete Streets and ask if circumstances changed, if we received grant funding and circumstances over time changed as to the use of that road, whether or not reversing the grant would be a problem. And I got a 1-word email, no. So I just forwarded you the grant application. You'll see that the grant application proposes something that didn't exist. We didn't have a non-vehicular road. I've also consulted with Mr. McDowell, and Mr. McDowell said, town engineer, that as proposed, that is, the road has sufficient space to have 2 lanes. So it's not a 2-lane road. It wouldn't be going in opposite direction, but you could have 2 rows of traffic heading in one direction.
Thank you, Scott. Mr. Sidney?
I'm just wondering if there's any, we're about 3 weeks from the end of school. This work is not going to get done before the end of school. And it occurs to me that given that it won't get done before the end of school, it will get done over the summer one way or another. I wonder if it makes sense to ask the administration to dot the i's and cross the t's for our next meeting and bring this back in 2 weeks.
Mr. Sidney, could you define dotting i's and crossing t's?
Well, things like verifying that the grant application, right, just doing a lot of the work, a lot of the legwork vetting a lot of the legwork you did, as the professionals, as opposed to the volunteers that.
I'll say what my frank concern is. If we approach, I worded my question to Complete Streets in a hypothetical without specifics. If we go back to Complete Streets and say we filed a fraudulent application, because we did, we filed an application, or a person in a department in this town filed an application and checked off 2 boxes which were clearly non-factual, that will cause us, our funding, to be more in jeopardy than acting on a one-word email from Complete Streets saying, no, if things have changed, things have changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't disagree with the premise, but I wouldn't say that we need to dot our i's and cross our t's by taking our grant application back to the state and saying, oh, look,
Well,
we got
I wasn't suggesting that. I was just
$325,000.
saying,
Well, that's why I want to know what your i's and t's are.
yeah, I just making sure that we don't endanger future funding in how we do this. That's really what I think that one point that Mr. Ostroff made is the one that concerns me. The rest of it's all true, and we do need to address the siloage that is
Absolutely,
happening.
absolutely.
But I want to make sure we don't do this in such a way that we accidentally jeopardize future funding.
Mr. Erickson, could I ask you to weigh in on this as somebody who's familiar with grant funding and you are the town administration?
Certainly, and in this case, I would want, pending action of the board, want to do a little bit of research myself. Given Complete Streets, just as a general initiative, was under a prior town employee. Not that I wasn't involved in it, but it was really being led by a prior town employee. I want to do a little bit of research on what that prior town employee, maybe what's in their files other than what's in this official submission to the state. I just want to understand a little bit more about what maybe led up to this exact project. In my experience working through state grant funding, yes, there could be concern with reversing a recently implemented project. I'd want to understand if there's a need to, yes, things change, but does that change mean that if you reverse it within 6 months, there's a difference, or reverse it within 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Sometimes state grant fundings do have this must be in place for X numbers of years, and I want to understand that from the Complete Streets program. I just don't know those details about Complete Streets. I also don't know the cost of this impact, like what was the cost of implementing this particular exact location, because we have grant funding, but this could have been part of a series of improvements, and I want to understand what this particular one was, the cost of this one was, and what it would take to reverse the action, but also understand, I want to review the grant application as well. I know you said you have the grant application. I want to get a copy.
I just sent it to you.
Yep, perfect, thank you. Just to make sure I'm understanding as to what exactly was submitted by the town, because ultimately it was an action of the town. I will say, just in my work with state grant funders, communities like Natick are very good at getting grants because we implement. We don't sit on grant funds, and we're known as a town that implements. And that grant funders do like to see that. Now, things change, and even a grant application could be submitted with information that I wouldn't say necessarily is inaccurate, but it could be something that could be open to interpretation per se. So I want to understand what that says. I would want to make sure that we have been the recipient of lots of funding through the Complete Streets program. And so I'd want to make sure that we're not jeopardizing future applications. I don't know if this would or would not do that. I don't want to know more about this particular project as it relates to our larger initiatives and how that works together with our Complete Streets program itself, because we have done a lot of work on complete streets through the years, and I want to make sure that we can continue to tap these grant funding sources for future years. So I'm giving you a non-answer in my answer because I need to do a little bit more research myself on this front before moving forward. But in my experience with state grant funders, state programs love communities that spend funds and seek more funds and then spend more funds and then seek more funds, because it helps show their work in the field, meaning they can come to a community like Natick and say, oh, that's state grant funded, that's state grant funded, that's state grant funded. Reversing a grant, if it's one, it might not be a big deal. If it's multiple, it might be a bigger deal. So I'd want to understand this particular project in context with the larger grant funding that we got from the Complete Streets and what that would look like moving forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Erickson.
So, Ms. Coughlin, do you think?
Hold on.
Sorry. Yeah, just, so I want to go back to my original question. Are you okay just deferring this for 2 weeks to let the administration do their thing?
Mr. Erickson, do you think that you'd be able to? Do you think 2 weeks is sufficient, given what's on your plate right now?
I think I can get some basic information in the next 2 weeks. I don't know if I'll have an answer to all of your questions in 2 weeks, but I do want to, I think we can get quite a bit of
touch base
information.
on.
Yep, exactly.
Do we think we want to put it on the agenda for the 14th, and then, if necessary, pull it and put it on the 28th if you're not ready?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yep.
Paul, did you have something?
I guess just a couple of comments. It's been an interesting conversation, and I can sympathize with Mr. Ostroff's concerns about silos and lack of communication. But I also, balance safety and urgency. I look at monies we get from grant, and the offset to that is how much do we pay out to somebody who's killed by a vehicle, in an accident. I know we have insurance for that, but there's a moral cost to that. And so I think transportation is obviously a very complex system that we're responsible for as road commissioners. So I appreciate the extra time, and I appreciate Mr. Erickson's response. I think it's prudent to postpone it. I think that's the right choice. In general, in terms of process, the Transportation Advisory Committee is one of several that we do appoint. And I think, as a board, we've talked about that. How are we engaging? What are the expectations we're setting for our appointed committees? What are our expectations in terms of receiving information and integrating those things? And to the extent that we have two quasi-overlapping bodies, or at least complementary bodies that might look at things from differing perspectives, I do take to heart what Mr. Ostroff has brought up in terms of the poor communication. That said, I'm just curious, Mr. Ostroff, as the former chair of that committee, did you or do any members of that committee receive the emails from the safety committee agendas and participate in those meetings, knowing that communication has been a problem?
I did many times. Yeah, I don't think they ever came to any of our meetings, but we certainly attended several of theirs.
No. Okay. So well, just in follow-up to that, I guess my concern is, we're a team of volunteers working with and assigning and appointing other teams of volunteers that are interacting with other teams of volunteers. I think this, again, is a demonstration of complexity in our system, good intentions, and sometimes, differing priorities or perspectives on things. And I do appreciate and respect how much work and time you've put into it personally. I know this is a passion and a profession for you. So I think we've benefited as a community tremendously from that. But I also think it's important, in terms of the communication when these things do surface as best we can, just be, mindful of that as a board, and mindful of that as our appointees, that we give that guidance when we do kind of review our committees. What is our expectation? We should have some clarity on that, but also that sense of equal ownership, or if there's a better way of doing things, we consider looking at fixing the system as opposed to screaming about sort of the inefficiencies of it without addressing it. And I think, I do think I hate saying this because it's a I can't say what I describe it as an adjective in terms of a response, but chicken stuff, basically. The fact is, we do get distracted, we do get busy, we have other more urgent things. I actually had the conversation about the difference between important and urgent, and just because this is important doesn't make it urgent to the other things that are on the plate and finite time management. So I do unfortunately think this has been a sort of a systemic problem with these two particular committees. Thank you.
But could I just respond quickly to what Mr. Joseph was saying?
Yep.
I realize, I'm sorry. I have sat in your seats, and I really understand the urgency of things. Really can easily crowd out things that are important, and that's why I'm really hesitant to criticize or even appear to be criticized the board's actions. But the committee, when I was chair, delivered a set of recommendations, and one of them was to reform how we approach transportation planning and engineering, and to try to have a more integrated process. Because it's what we have now is just not working. Residents go to the safety committee, the board sends them there, recommendations are made, and then nothing happens. There's no connection between government and within government, and that's a problem that I hope that you will prioritize, whether it's through direction to the administration, that you find a way to better align our values, which I firmly endorse the board's statements of values, and the practice. And that's not easy to do in our form of government, in any form of government. It is a challenge. I'm available to talk about any of this stuff. Obviously I'm privileged to continue serving as a volunteer, and I care about all this, but I'd like to think about the systems by which we get stuff done. So I'm happy to be a partner to this. And I'm just a believer, as I know all five, well, everyone in the room there is, on the power that we all have to actually affect positive change. And I approach things that way. And I look at this grant was an attempt to achieve something good. That doesn't mean it was perfect. I take strong exception to the word fraudulent, having looked at the application. I don't believe it was at all misrepresenting anything. But so I would caution using that term. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Happy to continue the conversation and working with you, and I appreciate this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ostro. So it sounds to me like I need a motion, or we need a motion.
We don't probably need a motion. We can just drop it to postpone, I think.
Well, wouldn't that be a motion to postpone it? No?
It's not a required action of the board. All you do is just take it under advisement and ask the administration to bring it to the upcoming meeting.
So asked.
There you go. Done.
Okay. All right. We're on, I think that is now to town administrator notes. Do you have anything, Mr.
No, we covered quite a bit in the announcements, and I have no additional notes at this time.
Okay, thank you. Select board concerns. Board, have we exhausted our concerns tonight? Or are we?
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had a question about, I've raised this question before and it's still not clear to me. How are we publicizing the select board hours? Other than making the announcement at the beginning of select board meetings?
Yeah, I wish Jay was here because I know we've done more robust work on the town's website and other avenues.
I don't see anything on the website. I don't see anything on social media.
Yeah, thank you.
If you could follow up with that, that'd be great, and just bring it back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Ms. Coughlin.
Yeah, and I just want to hammer home, I've actually had one-on-one conversations with a couple of board members about this particular breakdown between the Transportation Advisory Committee and the Safety Committee, and I don't know how we fix it. I'd love to have those, I haven't seen those recommendations from the Transportation Advisory Committee about what they suggest to make it work better. If we could resurrect those and get them distributed, maybe we could start to think about how to fix the problem.
I can send those to you.
Thank you.
Good.
If I may just ask, one item or several items through the years that have been, I know a question of even the safety committee is just better understanding and defining what their role is and is not. I think that's been through the years from when it started to where it is today. It's changed quite a bit, and I think maybe a reconnection with that at the board level would be a benefit, as well as the Transportation Advisory Committee.
I actually had a question about that. Why do we have two separate committees that look at trans safety? Can we just have one? Given the dearth of volunteers.
I mean, we used to have even more committees that dealt with transportation. So at one point, we consolidated down to just the Transportation Advisory Committee, but there was also a ped bike committee, a rail trail committee, a transportation committee, and we consolidated those about 6-7 years ago to just the Transportation Advisory Committee. The Safety Committee dates back a ways, and my understanding that it was really truly about safety questions, not about reviewing plans, more about, is there a
Public
safety
safety.
concern?
Okay.
Right. And it's morphed through the years to be a review committee of all things that could be remotely related to safety on any topic. And I think that has led to, I know in my conversations with, for example, Chief Hicks and others, some things get referred to the safety committee, and the safety committee is like, there's no safety issue here, so we have no role. And the expectation is that they're reviewing it from some perspective. And I think there just needs to be a reestablishment of what the safety committee is intended for and what it's not.
And the Transportation Advisory Committee?
Yep.
Okay.
And maybe there's a merger at that point when we reestablish, when we look at those compositions and what they're for and what they're not.
Or maybe just a clarity.
Or clarity, or what have you. And I
Or
know
maybe occasional joint meetings.
if there's even need, if there's clarity, then maybe it's a different, there are
Whatever.
different roles
We
here.
we need to, this is
One
a
is we need to
problem.
resolve.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Anything else? All right. Do we have a move?
Move to adjourn.
Mr. Sidney, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everybody.